The companies Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola provided financial support to 96 American national health organizations. Science sometimes makes mistakes, especially when science is being paid for. The effect of sugar on the body is roughly the same as the effect of tobacco on the body. Virtually all major American health organizations receive funding from two companies that sell poison. Sugar is poison. At the beginning of the last century, a formula based on cow's milk was developed. The word formula comes from formulate, meaning to create or synthesize, but it also resonated with another meaning, a mathematical formula. In both Russian and English, it is pronounced the same, and so began, I emphasize, a completely scientific campaign to demotivate women from breastfeeding. In other words, why breastfeed your baby when it's terribly inconvenient, doesn't work for everyone, interferes with quality of life and everything else, if there's a wonderful formula available? Most importantly, it was entirely scientific. The scientific credibility of this formula was beyond question. Starting from the 1920s, when the formula was invented, the percentage of breastfed babies began to drop sharply. By the 1940s, it was 60%. By the 1960s, it was 27%. And in the 1970s, the number had fallen to 23% of American children being fed breast milk. The rest were fed formulas, Nestlé, Similac, and many other companies. It was later revealed through other scientific studies that babies fed with formula get sick more often. According to data from the World Health Organizations, infants who are fed exclusively with formula have a 14 times higher risk of dying from diarrhea and a 4 times higher risk of dying from pneumonia. This applies to underdeveloped, third world countries. In the United States, formula-fed babies, 72% of them, had almost twice the likelihood of being hospitalized for respiratory illnesses. Is that all? No, that's not all. A 2017 meta-analysis published in The Lancet showed that breastfeeding reduces the risk of childhood obesity by 25% and in older age by 50%. In other words, most of my peers born in the 1960s and 1970s who were fed with formula are doomed to obesity because they didn't receive their mother's milk as infants. Is that all? No, that's not all. In older age, among those who were formula-fed compared to those who were breastfed, insulin resistance and the risk of developing type 2 diabetes are twice as high. This is, of course, not the only reason, but it is a major contributing factor, including to the American problem with obesity and metabolic syndrome. Is that all? No, ladies and gentlemen, that's still not all. Breast milk contains long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids of the DHA and RA groups, which are essential for brain development. Accordingly, children who were breastfed have, on average, IQ scores 5 points higher than those who were not. This IQ measurement was taken at the age of 30. Moving on. Is that all? No, that's still not all. It turns out that not breastfeeding is also harmful for women. Women who did not breastfeed have a 27% higher chance of developing breast cancer and a 25% higher risk of ovarian cancer. They also experience significantly higher rates of postpartum syndrome, depression, and obesity. But all of this, everything I'm telling you, we know now. Back then, in the 1960s and 1970s, which is exactly my generation, mothers were actively feeding their babies formula. And it was science. It was done scientifically. Now things have started to shift back. Already by the year 2000, 65% of American babies were once again being breastfed. And in 2025, a staggering 85% of mothers are breastfeeding their babies. Why am I showing you these numbers? Why am I showing you this graph? To demonstrate something obvious. Mothers want what's best for their children, and despite the inconvenience of breastfeeding, they do what science tells them to do, what scientists tell them. That's why society reacts very strongly, and then I'll show you new data on this, a lot of data, to what the media tells them, to what doctors tell them, to what the government tells them, and they do what they're told is right. The problem is we don't actually know what is right. Another example, the case of margarine. Margarine was invented in France. In America, there was a similar, though not identical, substance called Crisco. It was invented back in the 19th century. These were hydrogenated oils. Let's not dive into the chemical formula or the process right now. The whole idea was to take liquid oil and by saturating it with hydrogen, hydrogenation, turn it into solid fat. In doing so, what you get is a completely monstrous molecule from the perspective of human metabolism, trans fat, which is, if not deadly, then extremely harmful. In other words, margarine is a very harmful fat. Trans fat occurs very rarely in nature. Yes, it exists, but only in small amounts. But this artificial concentrated trans fat was created just to make it look like butter, though it wasn't butter. And for that purpose, natural fats were mutilated into this nightmare. Nevertheless, science claimed it was very healthy. In the 1940s, Americans consumed about 4 pounds of margarine per person per year. This was partly due to food shortages. But after the war ended, by the 1950s it rose to 8, in the 1960s to 10, and in the 1970s, during the peak of the anti-butter campaign, where butter was bad and margarine was good, consumption hit 14 pounds. From the 1970s onward, margarine consumption began to decline, and today it has fallen to below 2.5 pounds per person per year, a more than 4-fold drop. This is all science. Once again, this graph shows how receptive people are to data presented by science. People believe scientists, and they believe them far too readily. Scientists in the field of nutrition should not be trusted. They are frauds. You all remember very well that not long ago, foods like butter, eggs, avocados, cheese, nuts, and full-fat yogurts were considered bad and were supposed to be eliminated from the diet. Fruit juices, cereals, margarine instead of butter, and low-fat dairy products were considered healthy foods. This was all seen as science and was done in the name of fighting cardiovascular disease. The entire fat-free craze that broke out in America and spread across the world in the late 1970s, blazing through the 1980s and 1990s, was pure quackery. It led to reduced life expectancy, increased disease rates, and the widespread emergence of a huge range of other symptoms associated with what's now known as metabolic syndrome. This madhouse was tied to the name of one person. One person gave us this hypothesis, which later turned out to be unscientific. The hypothesis was picked up by manufacturers, lobbied for, paid for, and it became widely accepted for a long time. To this day, the government is too embarrassed to admit that this was effectively poisoning its own population. They quietly update their recommendations, but never acknowledge past mistakes. But we're not going to be shy. We're going to call it like it is. In front of you is the so-called pyramid, the food pyramid. This is the recommendation from the American government on how people should eat. See that at the base of this pyramid are grains, pasta, rice, flour, and so on. At the very top are fats. You're supposed to eat very little fat and a lot of grains. This has since changed. Very quietly, the pyramid was discarded, and instead of a pyramid, they now show us a plate. That is, you are supposed to eat roughly equal amounts of everything, but in moderation. This too is a different kind of quackery, but we will talk about that another time. So what happened to the American food pyramid, on the basis of which people believe and try to change their diets under this constant information attack? Moreover, based on this pyramid, American children were fed. Yes, in schools. Democrats pushed through free government lunches, and these meals are prepared according to this pyramid. As a result, children are fed pasta, all kinds of macaroni products. They are fed pizza. They are fed rice.
I think we're just about ready to build the perfect pizza.
This is what the doctor prescribed for them. That is why obesity among American children is leading. Because, well, American manufacturers of these products wanted to lobby American politicians. And to do that, they bought American scientists. All of this started with one person, a man named Ansel Keys, an American physiologist. He earned his PhD at Harvard University, where he studied zoology, biology, and physiology. He was a physiologist. In the 1930s, he became a professor of physiology at the University of Minnesota, and during the war, he received a government contract. As a scientist, the state entrusted him with developing the proper diet for the American military field ration. He developed the concept of the dry ration. This was his creation. The core issue with food is that you want to eat it, and bacteria want to eat it too. If you do not eat the product, bacteria will. That means it will rot. Rotting is the process of mold and bacteria consuming your food. So something has to be done to food so that bacteria and mold cannot eat it. That is the essence of preserving any product, unless it is kept in a refrigerator. Then the question arises, how are the bacteria in your stomach supposed to eat something that bacteria are not supposed to eat? Here we have a very clear logical contradiction. In order to make products long-lasting, in English, shelf life, so that they can be stored for a very long time without refrigeration, they have to be poisoned with something that bacteria and mold cannot consume. But then food poisoned with that something is not healthy for you because your stomach and intestinal bacteria, cannot process it properly. The intestinal bacteria and intestinal mold cannot eat this either. That's the interesting situation that results. And this dry product, the beginning of research in the field of food preservation and the creation of military rations, was precisely associated with Dr. Ansel Keys. He created the so-called K ration. That is, it was named after his surname. After that, he received the next contract. In 1944 to 1945, it was a study of how the human body responds to undernutrition, not starvation, but undernutrition. All of this was conducted in Minnesota under his supervision. This very famous study went down in history as the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, the Minnesota Experiment on Undernutrition. It was conducted from November 1944 to December 1945. 36 volunteers were recruited, all young men drawn from conscientious objectors and draft evaders. In the United States, there is the concept of a conscientious objector, and a person who does not want to go to the front cannot be forced to do so. Even back then, it was understood that this would cost more than it was worth. Instead, they were assigned to other useful duties. They worked as medics, handled logistics, and generally helped the army, but did not serve on the front lines. Accordingly, from these 36 fine young men, a group was formed and they were put on a diet of just 1,570 calories, slightly below normal. The normal intake for men is 2,200 to 2,500 calories. They had moderate physical activity, walking several kilometers a day. It was not like they were hauling sacks. Over a week, they covered about 30 kilometers, and you can calculate the daily energy expenditure. As a result of 6 months of undernutrition, the outcomes were staggering. So what were the results? A drop in body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, and basal metabolic rate, swelling of the legs and face, loss of muscle mass and strength, a constant feeling of fatigue and hunger. The participants became apathetic, irritable, and depressed, with obsessive thoughts about food. Libido declined. They tried all kinds of things, and this is well documented. They cut their food into tiny pieces and tried to eat little by little. Others tried the opposite, eating everything at once and then not eating for a long time. One man chewed enormous amounts of gum, trying to get calories from the chewing gum. Gum was initially unrestricted, then later limited. Many developed eating disorders. More than half, after coming out of this semi-starvation, began to overeat and gained weight. Sexual desire virtually disappeared, not because it was restricted, but because they simply did not want it. And in 1/3, signs of psychosis and other clinical disorders appeared. All of this happened to healthy young men who were only slightly underfed. The question of what they were fed is extremely important, because there is a theory that was promoted relatively recently, in 14 of this century, by Coca-Cola, claiming that calories are just calories. No, ladies and gentlemen, calories are far from just calories. We are not gasoline engines, and what we fuel ourselves with matters. Their calories came, from pasta and legumes. In other words, there was very little meat, and the only protein came from beans. So why was such an experiment needed? It was clear that after the war, Europe would be starving, and the American government had to decide to what extent Americans would need to feed Europe. Remarkably, the American government understood that for some time they would have to feed starving Europeans, because there was famine in Germany, famine in Italy, famine everywhere, including France. And in order not to let people die, the question was what the minimum ration should be, how many calories needed to be provided. That is why this strange experiment was carried out. I will digress and note that when I see Ukrainian prisoners of war who are now being returned home after negotiations involving Trump, they have effectively been subjected to this very Minnesota experiment. They were put on undernutrition, mostly a carbohydrate-based diet, in insufficient amounts. What happened in the Gulag and in other Soviet punitive institutions and camps, I will not even begin to describe. For Americans, it was surprising to see how people behave when they are underfed. But for us, for Russians and Soviets, there was the siege of Leningrad, there was Kolyma. We have something to draw on. All of this was carried out by this very Ansel Keys. These were his experiments. By that time, after working with the government on rations and dry field rations, he had extensive and influential connections. But we did not need him for that. We needed him for what he later did, unfortunately what made him infamous. He conducted the so-called 7 countries study. Several 100,000 people were studied, more than 100,000 individuals. And over the course of 25 years, researchers observed how much fat they consumed and what percentage or absolute amount of cardiovascular disease appeared in the population. After that, the famous curve was derived, which appeared almost linear and showed that the higher the consumption of saturated fats, the higher the likelihood of cardiovascular disease. Well, even back then, everyone already understood that correlation does not equal causation. So a theory was proposed, the cholesterol theory. The logic was as follows: fat increases cholesterol, cholesterol clogs arteries, clogged arteries lead to cardiovascular disease, strokes, and ischemic heart disease. That is it, a simple and seemingly logical theory, supported by data. Well, besides that, if you eat fat, you become fat. Completely obvious. You eat a piece of butter, and if you do not burn it off, that piece of butter becomes part of your subcutaneous or visceral fat. And that is how it began. This body of work was completed in the 1970s, and then the madhouse associated with fat-free products started. Everything began to be stripped of fat. Margarine was introduced instead of butter. People started drinking low-fat yogurts. From a statistical point of view, it did not help at all. It did not help whatsoever. Things only got worse. But it was precisely on the basis of these studies and this one individual, Ansel Keys, that we entered this period of human development. It should be noted that in 1972, another work was published by the British scientist John Yudkin, who first published medical research papers and then wrote a book about sugar. He argued that all these symptoms of obesity, heart disease, and so on come from increased consumption of sugar and simple carbohydrates and simple starches. His postulate was as follows: the body converts glucose into fat through a process known in English as lipogenesis. It is this fat, produced by overeating sugar and starches, that leads to insulin resistance, and in order to improve public health, it is necessary to reduce not the amount of fat, but the amount of sugar. This is very important because a war emerged between two theories: the theory of less sugar and more fat, and the theory of less fat and more sugar. Why are these interchangeable? Let us look at a bit of statistics. 1 gram of carbohydrates and proteins contains 4 kilocalories, while 1 gram of fat contains 9 kilocalories. If you reduce a gram of fat, you have to get those calories from somewhere. Poor people cannot afford to eat only fish and meat. Accordingly, calories have to come from accessible, cheap food sources. As a result, when you remove fats, you automatically increase sugar and simple glucose. There is no other way. Moreover, it turned out that if you remove fat from food, it tastes like a cardboard box. So all these low-fat products began to be aggressively loaded with sugar, yogurt, and everything else. It also turned out that sugar is an excellent preservative. You remove fat, add sugar, and the shelf life increases. On top of that, salt and other chemical preservatives were added. And this madhouse of stripping fat from products and increasing sugar content is what brought us to where we are now. But this is only the first half, or rather one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that this was undoubtedly profitable for someone, Kellogg's company. As of today, it has a market capitalization of $28 billion. That is how much the company is worth. $28 billion for a single food company. It originated from the name of two brothers. The first, the older brother, was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, born in 1852, and his younger brother was Will Keith Kellogg, born in 1860. They came from a Seventh-day Adventist family, the kind that awaits the end of the world. Their mother had 16 children, 6 of whom died in infancy. Nevertheless, the older brother became a physician. He was educated, by the way, with money from the religious community, which paid for his studies. He then worked as an organizer and physician of what became the first sanatorium in the world. This word is very familiar to Russians and Soviets. A sanatorium is a place where you restore your health. It comes from the Latin word sana, meaning health or healthy. On the doors of this sanatorium was written mens sana in corpore sano, meaning a healthy mind in a healthy body. That sana means healthy. So he received a very modest facility from the community and turned it into a sanatorium, which came to be known as the Battle Creek Sanitarium in the city of Battle Creek, Michigan. It featured beautiful architecture, enormous multi-story buildings, and was built according to the most advanced technology of the time. It operated from the late 19th century until the 1940s. Before that, the word sanatorium existed mainly in reference to tuberculosis sanatoria, places where people with tuberculosis went and often died. So the idea was to create a place where you improve your health rather than treat tuberculosis, and this concept belonged precisely to the older Kellogg. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, a vegetarian, and he held very deep philosophical views about the human body and the human spirit. For example, he rejected any form of sex. There are even rumors that despite being married for 40 years, he never had sexual relations with his wife. He promoted a celibate lifestyle, without alcohol, without cigarettes, without anything at all. He was a fanatic of this approach and for religious reasons also promoted a vegetarian diet. Accordingly, he needed something to feed people in the sanatorium. This was a purely commercial idea, to create something that could be served to them for breakfast. At that time, the American breakfast consisted of eggs, sausages, and meat. In other words, breakfast was substantial. No eggs, no meat, but people still had to be fed with something. He invented cornflakes. And this is where his younger brother came in, who was very business-oriented. If the older brother was obsessed with a healthy lifestyle, the younger one was obsessed with money. He took these hydrogenated corn-based hard, crunchy flakes and coated them with sugar syrup, making a glaze. In other words, he took carbohydrates and covered them with sugar. And that is how, in 1906, Kellogg's Cornflake Company was born. Cornflakes are cornflakes. People of my generation will remember that in 1960, in the Soviet Union, cornflakes were produced that were absolutely identical to the original recipe with which Kellogg's Cornflake Company entered the market in 1906. And it was a huge commercial success. You take something that is very easy to produce, corn and cornmeal. This is all highly processed food. Many people today do not understand what processed food actually is. If you take an ear of corn, boil it, and eat it, you are consuming a whole product, a natural product, as nature intended. If you take corn kernels, grind them into flour, then add 15 ingredients whose names no one can pronounce without a chemistry degree, including colorants, then add sugar, and process all of this at extremely high temperatures, the factory producing cornflakes ends up resembling a gunpowder factory. And after all that, this is called food. It is not food. It is not food, because this delight can sit on shelves for an indefinitely long time, for several years, and that means bacteria do not want to eat it. You will not put an ordinary ear of corn on a shelf. If you do, it will sit there for a few weeks, dry out, start to rot, and bacteria will begin to eat it. But with cornflakes, everything is fine. There is no water there, there is nothing except sugar, salt, and a pile of chemicals. And this delight is fed to our children. Accordingly, these companies, specifically Kellogg's and many others, including Pepsi and Coca-Cola, spent enormous amounts of money to convince American doctors that this was healthy food. And in the Soviet Union as well, when I was preparing for this video and went through advertisements. Well, not advertisements, but official announcements, because there was no advertising as such. Cornflakes were promoted as healthy and beneficial food. And in America, until quite recently, all of this was considered healthy and beneficial food. Those children who were born in the 1960s and 1970s, my generation, were deprived of their mother's milk, then put on cow's milk, plus Dr. Kellogg's cornflakes. And now we are trying to understand why there is so much obesity in America. We have figured it out. Because science was wrong, you see. Science sometimes makes mistakes, especially when science is being paid. And when I say that science is being paid, these are not claims pulled out of thin air. From 2011 to 2015 of this century, the companies Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola provided financial support to 96 American national health organizations. Virtually all major American health organizations receive funding from two companies that sell poison. Sugar is poison. The effect of sugar on the body is roughly comparable to the effect of tobacco on the body. It would be strange if a company selling tobacco invested money in health organizations. This is the same thing. Those 96 include the National Institutes of Health. Practically all pediatric associations, cardiology associations, all these associations are nursing at the breast of Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. These same companies use enormous resources on marketing strategies to downplay the health risks of their products. And they finance these sugary products. And when it became clear that Pepsi is not just sugar, but something even worse, not sugar at all, but high fructose corn syrup, what is the difference? I will explain it chemically. Sugar, so-called sucrose, is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. It is a compound molecule in which half is glucose and the other half is fructose. Glucose and fructose are metabolized in the body in completely different ways. That is, as soon as sugar enters your body, it is broken down into its two components, and the metabolism of each of them is completely different, absolutely different. But high fructose corn syrup is not sugar. In it, the ratio of fructose to glucose is 70 to 30 in favor of fructose, which is why it is called high fructose corn syrup. And the metabolism is different as well. This is a direct hit to the liver. High fructose corn syrup is metabolized by the liver through fructose pathways. If you do not drink alcohol, then please stop consuming any sweetened beverages in America because they are full of this substance. These companies did everything possible to undermine public awareness among Americans and invested millions of dollars into the calories are calories neutrality campaign, meaning that calories are just calories and it does not matter where you get them from because energy is energy. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is far from just energy. The calories from broccoli and the calories from chicken are metabolized in completely different ways, with entirely different hormonal responses in the body. The campaign by Nestlé, which produces a huge amount of infant formula, shows that while breastfeeding rates have increased in America, they have declined worldwide. Now they sell in the third world what they can no longer sell in the first world. They teach women in Africa not to breastfeed, but to feed their babies with this formula, fully understanding the harm that the absence of breastfeeding causes to society. The Sugar Research Foundation funded studies in the 1960s in which there were direct manipulations and falsification of data. There was a study comparing two groups of rats, one fed sugar and the other fed fat, to see what would happen. It turned out that the rats fed fat did far better than those fed sugar, and the data was simply adjusted. The sugar industry influences public health recommendations both in the United States and worldwide. The World Health Organization also receives money from the American sugar industry. Very recently, in 23, a report was published. The article is in front of you, showing that among the panel of advisors who advise the government on healthy nutrition, half receive money from companies such as Nestlé, Coca-Cola, and other sugar-producing corporations. In other words, there are no independent scientists there. They receive money from interested parties. There is an obvious conflict of interest. Now, I want to explain how a conflict of interest actually works. In the United States, the system is set up so that if you are a scientist and you want to conduct research, it is not your university, but you personally who must find grants. You have to find a company or an organization that will give you money. You submit a proposal saying that you are such and such a scientist and want to study a particular topic, and you wait to see if you receive funding. When you do receive the money, part of it goes to your university in exchange for letting you conduct the research, and part of it becomes your salary and the salaries of your staff. If you do not find grants, if you do not establish connections with someone, you can be a brilliant scientist 100 times over, but you will not be able to do laboratory research because you have no money. If you have no research, you do not publish. If you do not publish, you are not a scientist. That is why American scientists are constantly engaged in what is essentially very cheap marketing. They are looking for funding sources. In reality, it is not scientists looking for money, but money looking for scientists. A company wants to prove that something is harmless, or on the contrary harmful, in order to destroy a competitor. Which scientists want to do this research? Volunteers are found, the study begins, and then another mechanism kicks in. These mechanisms must be clearly understood. If I conduct a study and fail to prove the proposed thesis, then from the point of view of science, this is still a result. That is why scientists, especially in physiology and biology, are heavily biased. They desperately want to prove their theses, because otherwise it is career suicide. Scientists are placed into a system of absolute economic pressure and ordinary human behavior within society. They want salaries, careers, publications, and conference invitations. As a result, scientists in this situation are motivated to do two things. First, to look for funding sources, and second, even if not to falsify data outright, then at least to shape results in a way that satisfies the employer and supports their career. The circle is closed, and everything you know about healthy nutrition should be treated with enormous skepticism. All these swings where avocado is harmful, then beneficial, coffee is harmful, then beneficial, wine is harmful, then beneficial, red meat is healthy, no red meat is harmful, and so on endlessly, are all consequences of wars between producers of meat, fats, dairy, nuts, and other products. Some scientists are paid for one study and conclude that nuts are healthy. Others are paid for another study and conclude that they are harmful. No one here can be trusted. Doctors, who are bombarded with these articles just like you are, often have no clear idea what is harmful and what is beneficial, with very rare exceptions. Let us summarize. First conclusion. Society reacts extremely strongly to information about healthy or unhealthy food. Society is easy to manipulate. I showed you curves of margarine consumption and curves of breastfeeding rates. I could show many other examples. Over decades, society radically changes its attitude toward products if it is given certain information. This leads to the next conclusion. Large manufacturers manipulate governments through political lobbying and manipulate journalists by paying for articles. Now they have learned to manipulate bloggers as well. In order to expand their markets, they focus on making products as cheap as possible and with the longest possible shelf life, with absolutely no concern for your health. Only very recently did the American Department of Health force the company Kellogg's to remove dyes from its cornflakes, of which they produce 17 varieties, and this process will take 2 years. Supposedly, they will remove them. Before that, they had no intention of removing dyes that have proven neurological consequences. The next conclusion we draw is that through the mechanism I have described, scientists can be easily persuaded to deliver the desired results. And the final and main conclusion, all notions of healthy or unhealthy food are very, very, very skeptical claims. And the question arises, so what should we eat? And the answer is completely obvious. Eat what your ancestors ate. Eat it in the form in which your ancestors ate it, if you can manage that. The second part is very hard to do. Meat is no longer the same meat that existed in the time of your grandparents. Vegetables are often not the same either. But still, try to eat the way your ancestors ate. Your ancestors did not eat fruit 365 days a year. That did not exist. That is a modern invention. Fruit appears in August. Fructose stimulates weight gain. This is a normal reaction. In August, you eat apples and pears, gain weight, and in winter, you lose weight. A natural and understandable reaction. You need to store fat for the winter so you do not die of hunger. But if you store fat 365 days a year, then why do you need this fat at all? In the absence of any reliable information, the most obvious guide is to eat the way your ancestors ate. And to conclude, the two longest living countries in the world are Japan and France. What do they have in common in their diets? What do Japanese and French diets have in common? They live the longest, the fact that both smoke a lot. Can we conclude that cigarettes prolong life? No, we cannot. Cigarettes kill quite effectively. What they actually have in common is that both eat ancestral food. They eat what their ancestors ate to a much greater extent than Americans do. Why are Americans the most obese nation? Because in America, the concept of ancestral food was destroyed. The concept of traditional food was destroyed. Moreover, it is unclear whose traditions, with many mixed marriages, different cultures, different cuisines. On top of that, there was also the culture of so-called frozen meals, where the freezing process destroys almost all fiber. What we get from our mother, from our parents, from our mother, is bacterial flora. A child is born completely sterile, and in the first few hours of life, passing through the birth canal, the child receives fecal bacteria from the mother, and this triggers the formation of the child's intestinal microbiome. If a child is born by cesarean section, this does not happen, and the child's gut flora consists of what they picked up in the hospital. Whatever was flying around in the hospital microbes becomes their intestinal bacteria. This is now understood, and they perform what is called a vaginal swab, taking the mother's bacterial environment and applying it to the baby's lips. As a result, every person's gut microbiome is unique, just like fingerprints, and it is largely formed at birth by the mother. Eat what your grandmothers ate.